Hi, everyone. Hello. Welcome to Book Talk, Intro to Publishing Chat. I'm Sarah Russo, and I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for coming. If you haven't already, I'd love to encourage you to head over to my website, which is sarahrusso.com, and register for my newsletter. We will talk there about branding tips, author promotions, and all sorts of publishing interesting stuff. So come on over and sign up for that newsletter if you haven't already. If you're on Twitter, please feel free to live chat this session today, and you can use the hashtag BookTalk to do that. So in any event, let's see what else. So this first workshop is just an introductory chat. You can feel free to post your comments either in the comment box over on my website, which I will see, or if you've clicked through to YouTube, you can also post them in the YouTube chat box and I will see them there, and I'll go through all of those questions at the end. And if you haven't taken a look around my website yet, please go take a look, because there's other workshops there which take a deeper dive into Publishing 101 is the first workshop, and the second one that is up is on book tours. So those will be going live, but registration is open now. And there should be 5 more before the end of the year, so go check that out. All right, great. So today we're going to talk about the introductory basics of book publishing, and I'd love for you to keep your questions in mind. Feel free to chat them in the chat box at any point throughout, and I'll answer them at the end. But we are going to fundamentally talk about writing and how pretty much most people I meet anyway, has a book in them. And there's a big difference between being able to write a book and being able to actually publish a book. And that difference is just education and being able to work through the system, whether that's the self-publishing system or the traditional book publishing system. They're both extraordinarily different. They're incredibly competitive in both instances, and you have a lot to do if you're going to make a book. So we're going to go through some slides here, and hopefully it's going to let me move through my slides for you guys. Give me 1 second. And I appreciate your sticking with me through the tech challenges here, because there are many of them. Okay, so let's start with the types of publishers there are. There are 5 major big traditional publishers. They're fairly well known. You see them in bookstores every day. They are Simon & Schuster, Hachette, Macmillan, HarperCollins, and the biggest of them, the combined Penguin Random House, which in and of itself has over 200 distinct imprints and divisions within Random House itself. All of those other publishers I mentioned also have distinct imprints, and you would submit your book to each one individually if you were interested in trying to publish with one of those big publishers. An agent certainly helps, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. The second type is academic publishers. Those are university presses like Oxford and Yale and Princeton. Many universities have a publishing arm. Some of them are even quite small, where they may only have 2 or 3 people working at the press. But many universities have a press that is publishing books from both their academics and people more broadly. There are also academic publishers, more for-profit academic publishers like Wiley and Taylor and Francis and Routledge and some others. So those are all options if you're writing a more academic book. Then there are independent presses, and there are now hundreds of independent presses where you can potentially submit your books. They vary in size from actually fairly large, like Norton, which is independently owned, Grove Atlantic, which is owned by its employees, which is really interesting model, Workman Publishers, which is still owned by the Workman family. So there are big ones like that, right down to micro independent presses that only publish 2 or 3 books a season. So that's another option. Amazon is now, you certainly know it from its self-publishing platform, but it is also a publisher of books in its own right. It employs dozens of editors. In a traditional book publishing model, they have numerous imprints, including Little A, which does literary fiction, and Amazon Crossing, which is now the largest publisher in the United States of fiction and translation, or books and translation, not just fiction. So that's Amazon. And then there's self-publishing, or what people call indie authors who are publishing themselves. The indie space is extraordinarily large. Over 1 million books were self-published last year, 2018. So that's something that needs to be kept in mind if indie publishing is a route that you're thinking about taking. Okay, so sorry, this makes me toggle back and forth between the two screens to make this work. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the global marketplace. So I already did mention that over 1 million books were self-published last year in the United States, but over 360,000 books were traditionally published by publishing houses in the US as well. So that's a lot. That's a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunities. You could very well be one of that 360,000. So I do strongly recommend getting into the potential of publishing into that space. But if you decide that the self-publishing route is your route, that's an option too. So the UK publishes more books per capita than anywhere in the world, and India is the most well-read, where the large majority of people are spending upwards of 10 hours a week reading. So the global marketplace is one that all authors should be thinking about, because there's the potential to significantly grow your readership if you're not just thinking about publishing in the US. Okay, so moving right along to the media. The media marketplace in the United States is a distinct challenge for most people who are thinking about publishing a book. We are the New York Times Book Review is receiving upwards of 1,000 books a week. They only publish about 25 reviews a week. And that's not just long form reviews, but little snippets about books and cluster reviews of, a number of books or children's books or whatever it may be in a specific column. So those aren't full page reviews. And then there are really just a handful of reviews and interviews in the Daily Times each week. The media still sees publishing houses as distinct gatekeepers, and that is a benefit of going the traditional publishing route. It is far more challenging to get media coverage if you're self-publishing, but it can be done. So there's things to be learned there as far as how to approach media if you're self-publishing. Okay, platform. So talking about platform is really important when we are talking about publishing into the marketplace. For experts and academics, nonfiction authors, platform is by far the most effective way to reach readers. For novelists and memoirists, it's connecting with community, and that can be, in both instances, that can be online through social media, but it's also really important in real life, making sure that those networks are robust and utilized not just for the promotion of your book, but also for the opportunity to help other authors in the process. Karma, what goes around comes around. Okay, so talking just a little bit more about that writer-author platform and why I think it's so necessary. It's really just about reaching people. It's reaching distinct communities depending on what your area of either expertise or what your memoir is about, or what your novel, where your novel is set and the communities there. Social media can allow you distinct ways of reaching people that you might not otherwise have reached. Your expert remit and being a resource if you're an academic or a professional who's writing a book. And then other writing that you do, and just maintaining visibility. If you write book reviews, making sure that that's very much the foot you put forward when you're writing your proposal and making sure that publishers understand what your remit is and what you're doing in the writing space, whether that's essays, personal essays, or fiction, short stories, poetry. You're not just an author, you're a writer doing the job every day. So thinking about that. And then your local bookstores and libraries and other venues that you're going to need to be part of your day to day. It can't be something that you are activating them when you need their help. You need to also be extending a hand to them. So just thinking about all of those things, both in advance of the proposal stage, because being able to tell the potential publishers about the platform that you have and what you've been building over months or years is really valuable in that pitching process. And also after the fact, when you need to try and help your publisher sell that book, or if you're self-publishing, sell that book yourself. Okay. I hope you're thinking about questions. I'm sorry that my video feed overlaps over the slides a little bit. We'll fix that in the next session. So just quickly, most of the questions that I receive are around agents and royalties, and can you help me find an agent, and do I need to hire an editor? And there's so many, and I hope that you'll ask some of those, but we'll just sort of quickly go through a couple of the key things that I think many people ask. Do you need an agent? It helps. There's no doubt that having an agent can be incredibly helpful. There are lots of resources for finding an agent. Publishers Marketplace is probably one of the best ones, where you can research and look for agents by subject area and find what they're interested in. But also following the guidelines and being really sure that you are doing exactly what they're asking for, because it's easy to just be dismissed because you didn't follow the proposal guidelines that agents are requesting. What is a big advance? I get this question all the time. It really depends on the publishing house. A big advance for a small publisher might be $6,000 or $7,000. A big advance for, Michelle Obama was $2 million or something crazy. It might have been more than that. So, the $2 million advance is not typical, and most of us are not Michelle Obama, but there's potential for six-figure advances if the book is seen as extremely valuable and that there's a lot of potential for sales. So having an agent can help you get to that place where you can get a big advance. What happens when your book doesn't earn out? This earn out term is something that people seem to be authors outside of having been published yet seem to be finding this word earn out. It's in the media more. It essentially means that the publisher earned back the advance that they paid you. So if your publisher paid you $15,000, you don't start earning any royalties, so you don't get any additional money per sale per book until your publisher has earned out the $15,000 that they've paid you in advance. So people also ask, how do I get paid my advance? Typically, the structure is 50% upon signing of the book and 50% when your publisher accepts the book. So not necessarily when you submit that initial manuscript, but when they agree that it's still something they want to publish. What can you negotiate for? This is a really complex question that people ask all the time. If you have an agent, you can negotiate for more things than you could if you don't have an agent. There are things that you probably can't negotiate for. Random House's ebook royalty rate is probably just what it is, and it's the same for everyone, unless you're Anne Rice, and then maybe you have some negotiating power on something like that, and they've been publishing you for 20 years. Excuse me, but there are things that you can negotiate for if you have an agent who can help you and the publisher is really keen to sign you. So it's something to keep in mind, that you do have some negotiating power with a publisher. Okay. I've worked the large majority of my career in marketing and publicity and publishing communications and branding. So I get a lot of questions in this sphere. I won't go through all of these, but these are some of the questions that I generally get about how decisions are made on the marketing and publicity end. Probably the one I receive more than anything everything else is why I'm not being sent on tour. Book tours are phenomenally expensive, and most marketing departments and publicity departments don't have enough budget to put more than a handful of authors on tour each season. So the large majority of authors aren't getting a tour. Does that mean you can't do events? No, you can still do events, and that's the session that I have a workshop coming up on. There are many things that an author can do, even if their publisher is not sending them on book tour. That needs to be done carefully, because a book tour, whether your publisher is paying for it or not, is a lot of work for your marketer and your publicist. So there's some careful stepping that needs to be done there in order to make that work. Will my marketer help me set up my social media profile? This is a question I also get all the time. No, not necessarily. The expectation is that you are going to spend your time setting up your social media profiles, a website for yourself. Most publishers will not design you a website. They might make you a Twitter banner with your book when it's got a jacket design. So they may do some smaller tasks like that for your social media, but they're probably not going to do a full-on professional branding for you to help you establish social media. The hope is that you're going to come to the publisher with some of that established already. Should I hire freelance help? It really depends on what your goals are. And I think a big part of publishing a book is thinking about what's the purpose of this? Why am I publishing this book? Is it a vanity project, or is there something that I really need to communicate to the world? And if there's something that you need to get out into the world, you really might want to consider hiring some help to make sure that you get from point A to point B and you're actually reaching those not only potential readers and people who would buy your book, but also people who are in a position to amplify your messaging and talk about the work and the research or whatever it is that you're trying to get out into the world. Okay. Website. So we talked about this for a second. Do you need a website? Again, it really does depend on what your goals are. If you want to be a speaker and that's your primary goal, and your book is an opportunity for you to leverage your expertise and do more speaking, whether that's conferences, paid speaking engagements, free speaking engagements at libraries or book festivals or other venues, yeah, you probably are going to want a website under those circumstances. It's something that will allow you to be found when someone searches for, I don't know, give me an idea, looking for a speaker who knows about artificial intelligence and technology and how it's affecting people in their day-to-day. People Google for that stuff. So being able to have a website that has good SEO and tagging on it that allows someone to find you when they're searching for speakers who talk about artificial intelligence, that is incredibly helpful. Or, people who are recovering from alcoholism and have a memoir and are speakers in that area. That's something too, searchable, so people can find you if they're searching for that stuff. A website does not have to be expensive or complicated. You could, in fact, build one yourself if you had the time to do it, but it also is something that you could hire someone to build for you and not spend tens of thousands of dollars. That's generally unnecessary. But it does help with your future planning and integration with the publication of your book, and it's a home for you to put links to Barnes & Noble and IndieBound and Amazon. For people to purchase your book. So a website is not a bad thing if you are going to actively utilize it and update it, put new media there, blog there, have your Twitter feeds and your Instagram feeds populating on that website, all of that integrated. That's really helpful. If it's just, a banner sitting in the internet somewhere, it's barely as good as a sign on the side of the road in Siberia. So don't invest in it if you're not going to actively use it, because otherwise it's just not, nobody's going to find it. Okay, so that is the end of the PowerPoint slides, and I'm going to open it up to questions. And pardon me for looking over in this direction. Oh, it says unable to connect to chat, so that's not helpful. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to refresh this stream. And hopefully it's going to come back. And let's see if anybody posted any comments here. Okay. Great. So we have a question from David who asks, it sounds like presses don't do much to help authors. So why should an author go with a press if I'm going to be doing all the work? That's a really great question. Thank you, David, for asking that. And I'm just going to prompt people because we don't have a lot of questions yet. So please feel free to pop your questions into the YouTube chat because that seems to be where they're coming from right now. And hello to the other people who said hi. So publishers do, actually, I believe publishers do a phenomenal amount and provide a really significant service. So they're not just publicizing and marketing your book, and that is incredibly important, but they're also on the production end doing jacket design. They're doing interior design, they're editing and copy editing. So there's a lot of that back end work that isn't always as visible, but having consulted with self-publishing authors, I can say it's incredibly challenging for individuals to do all of that back end work. And then there's the metadata and setting everything up in the accounts, Amazon and independent accounts, reaching them. If you're publishing strictly through the Amazon platform, your book will never see an independent bookstore unless you physically go into them yourselves and tell them, here's the book. But then at the same time, even if they say, yes, I'm happy to stock it, they may not order from Amazon. They may be unwilling to order stock from Amazon. So there's questions there about what a publisher actually does and what's visible to authors, either both before the process and after the process. There's a lot that's done on the back end, both in marketing and publicity, that's not as visible as authors might like. And that's quite simply because those individuals are working with dozens of authors and sometimes hundreds of authors at any given time. They don't have a lot of time to spare, but it doesn't mean they're not doing any work. So the partnership, I think, is incredibly important. It's much easier for a publicist to be effective if they have an author to brainstorm with and someone who's actively working with them, reaching out to their own contacts, telling them far enough in advance that they have an event happening at their local bookstore. All of those things are a partnership opportunity with your publisher or your publicist or your marketer to make sure that things are happening in real time and as effectively as they possibly can, given the phenomenal workloads that most of these people are working with inside at publishing houses. That's not to say you can't do it on your own. You can, and you could hire people to help you to do that work. You can hire a copy editor, you can hire a jacket designer, and then you have full control over what you're doing. So there is the possibility of doing it that way and making sure that things go the way you want them to. Okay, do we have other questions? Let's see. Don't be shy, really. I'm nice, I promise. Okay, no questions over there. I think the live stream is working on the chat. Nobody has any more questions. Okay, I'll ask my own questions. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, a question I get all the time. What happens if your book doesn't earn out? So if your book doesn't earn out your advance, that's a really challenging situation for most authors. If your book doesn't earn out its advance, you have the likelihood of, number one, not being able to get that advance for your next book, or not being able to get another book deal at all. So depending on how big the advance was, how much the publisher lost, you might be in a real bind. So it is important when an author comes in having received a really big advance. Oftentimes, it feels like they want to sit back on their laurels a little bit and expect the publisher to invest just as much as they paid them in advance in marketing and publicity budget. And more often than not, that's really not the case. Movies generally get a marketing budget equal to the size of the production budget, which could be millions and millions of dollars. That's not the case with books. Budgets for most books vary from nothing to, maybe $20,000 if you're lucky. If your publisher can afford to do some real advertising, you are, you're in a situation where they might be able to drop an ad in the Wall Street Journal or in the New York Times, and that's the whole budget, right? That's $35,000 for an ad, and it's one and done. So partnering with your publisher and making sure that you are actively doing everything you can to earn out that advance to sell as many copies as is humanly possible is really important. And how you do that is through education and just knowing what you need to do in order to make that happen. Okay, it looks like I just got a note that some of the questions aren't coming through. So I'm going to refresh over here and make sure we're getting all of the questions. And oh, okay. Here we do have some questions. Okay, great. Thank you to Siri for letting me know that maybe questions weren't coming through. Okay, so Lenny asks, where could authors go to get more support guidance for building their social media? And can you talk about how to think of appropriate hashtags? Yeah. Hi, Lenny. Thanks for asking that. That's a great question. So there are people who do, that I do as well, but there are other freelancers who do consultations around social media and support authors in making their social media as good as possible. It's something that is can be really valuable depending on what the author's goals are and how they want to achieve them. I've always said, if social media isn't a resource for you, if it's something that you feel like is work and you're not getting anything back out of it, it's going to be very, very hard to maintain that social media profile. So I strongly recommend making sure that you have your social media set up in such a way that you're receiving information as well and that you're engaging with a community that you're interested in, whether that's the writing community, the science and environment community, the crime suspense novel community. Like there are so many of them, and you can do that. You can find those individuals by using hashtags. So a hashtag is very simply the pound symbol followed by a word or a phrase. And one that I follow frequently is hashtag women in STEM. It's something that I'm personally interested in. There is a massive community of people who follow that hashtag and engage with that hashtag. So thinking about how to utilize a hashtag is really just a matter of finding the people that you want to find as far as information you want for yourself and information you want to put out into the world. So hashtags should be short as you can possibly make them. I think women in STEM is probably as long as a hashtag should be. If you can keep a hashtag to 10 or 12 letters or less, that is a great way to go. I would also recommend checking what that hashtag is used for. So there might be something else. I forget what it was years ago. There was a hashtag that we were trying to use for some campaign, and it was also being used by like a motorcycle club. And I was like, that has nothing to do with books. So making sure that the hashtag actually is viable within the area that you want to be holding a conversation and not in use by someone else who's going to muddle up your message, like the motorcycle club people. Okay. Let's see other questions. You mentioned a pitch. Do different presses look at things the same way? And can one submit to multiple presses at the same time? Okay. It's going to take a sip of drink. Okay. So, yes, different presses do look at things differently. And you can pitch multiple presses at the same time. So it's not the same as pitching an op-ed, for instance, where you need to send it to one publication at a time and wait for an answer. You can pitch as many presses as you want. But I highly recommend that the presses be appropriate for your work. So doing the research is really important. It's not great to spam presses with your proposal. Some presses do look at things in different ways. So university presses, for example, many of them need to have a proposal vetted by at least one and sometimes two or three scholars in the field before it can be accepted. And those criticisms that those scholars come back with on that proposal need to be addressed by the academic or the author who's writing that book. That's a fairly different process from what the trade publishing process is, where there is no necessarily vetting of the book in that way. And you can see over the last year or so, there's been some really interesting kerfluffles around that, where, books by journalists have been published and not really copy edited and not fact checked, and they've had some problems. University presses can't 100% avoid those issues, but they try to create a scenario where it's less likely that they're going to get into trouble because they've had a number of scholars in that same field research and review those proposals. So yeah, it does vary from press to press. Many of the independent publishing houses list guidelines on their website, and you can go to take a look. You're probably not going to find that at on the website for Crown or Knopf or Penguin. But if you're submitting to smaller publishers, those guidelines are oftentimes available. And if you're submitting to agents, their website often will also have guidelines on what they want to see, whether it's, just a summary plus the first 3 chapters, whatever it may be. I strongly recommend following the guidelines so you're not disqualified right off the bat. Okay. Siri asks, do you have advice about how best to find suitable radio shows to pitch author interviews to, and how best to prepare for those interviews? Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll expand that to podcasts too, because radio is it's outstanding, but it's also incredibly competitive. And sometimes the producers for those shows aren't obvious. It's not necessarily like pitching a journalist or pitching a book critic. You can find who's reviewing what in your subject area just by, going and looking at other book reviews that people are publishing. Those publishers, or the producers rather, behind those radio shows requires a little bit more sleuthing to figure out who they are and how to get an email and how to pitch them. But podcasts also have that same problem, where sometimes you're trying to find a real human being, but more often than not, they have a generic email that you can submit to. And many of them really are looking for content. So if your book and your area of expertise really fits what they're working on, they're probably going to be happy to hear from you. So as far as pitching those shows and finding the right shows, it's a matter of what you listen to. So if you're an expert, as I know Siri is in the sciences and in writing in science journalism, there are shows that are being produced in those areas. If you're looking for more mainstream programs, finding the hosts of specific radio shows and what they're interested in can be really helpful. So, finding, I'm trying to think of an example, the right producer for the right subject area may be easier if you find the right host who's talking about that specific topic. So Celeste Headley, for example, is very interested in discussions of race and conflict and talking with people and how to have productive conversations. So if your book falls into any of those areas, finding her producer is probably more helpful, or you could even try sending her an email directly. So that's how I recommend finding the right people, is just listening to radio as much as you can. I think many authors pitch radio shows expecting producers to just be interested. And they have so much to cover in any given day, especially in this current media environment with hearings and everything that's going on every single day, that it can be incredibly competitive. So I do really recommend looking at podcasts as well. I heard a statistic recently that there are 400 new podcasts created every single day. So there's a phenomenal amount of airspace out there. Finding the podcasts that actually have reach is you could probably use the help of an expert there, and a publicist might be useful in guiding you a little bit on where you might want to go for some of those podcasts and which ones are actually worth your time. So yeah, as far as the second half of the question was how best to prepare for those interviews. Okay. So I love to have authors just write up 5 bullet points. You have a lot less time in most circumstances than you think you do. So having your messages, the key things that you'd like to be able to bring across in the interview is really important. You probably will only get to say 2 of them out of those 5, but depending on what the show is, one or the other might be more important, and that you'll want to push that instead of another message. So doing those bullet points, having your elevator pitch ready if someone asks you, what's your book about? Just being able to describe it in one single sentence is really important. And that's something you just write it down, like write it and rewrite it again until it feels perfect, that it really conveys the message that you want to say. And the other thing authors forget a lot is to say the name of the book on air. So make sure you repeat at least once the title of your book. And if you can get it in there twice, once at the beginning and once at the end, that's optimal. Hopefully the host is also going to say the name of your book once or twice. And also I'll say too, if you do land a podcast or a radio interview, don't let that be the end of utilizing that interview. Tweet it, retweet it when it's up online and people can listen to it later. Make sure that you push it out to your networks, include it in your newsletter, a link to that. There are many ways to reutilize that interview and make sure that it continues to go as broadly as it possibly can. Also, a lot of those podcasts and radio stations, they have an online site and they're happy to have content there. So you can offer them, a short excerpt from the book, and there's an opportunity for someone to read a little piece after they've heard your interview and prompt them to head over to their bookstore and buy a copy. Okay. Teresa asks, any advice on pitching or marketing children's books? Yeah, so children's books are a whole different animal because your audience isn't buying the books themselves, right? So most, depending on what age range you're buying for, my daughter's at the point where she happily wanders through our local bookstore for hours picking out books. But for younger kids especially, and if you have picture books, it's finding that parent market for them. And that is really community. There's the online community for people and parents who are really interested in books. There's hashtags like We Need Diverse Books. So especially if you're writing from the perspective of a diverse topic, that can be incredibly helpful to utilize those hashtags. I recommend that you don't utilize them if you're not writing a book on a diverse topic. Inserting yourself into a discussion can be not a great thing in that sort of a situation. But as far as reaching those parents, there's the online method, and reviews can be really helpful. And there are a number of blogs, librarian blogs especially, that review children's books that are a great way to market and outreach to those individuals. And then again, in real life, in your own community, can you do a story hour at your local library? Can you donate 2 copies of the book to the library? If people are checking the book out and you have a large library system, I live in Brooklyn. So, if that book is being repeatedly checked out at your local branch, the chances of other branches ordering the book become higher. Can you go talk at a local school? There are lots of opportunities to engage with the community And I think that's really, really important for children's books, especially. Okay, let's see. More questions. Thanks, everybody. Lenny asks, what is the difference between what publicity and marketing does? I love this question so much. So the easiest way, the way I like to describe the difference between publicity and marketing is that publicity has to be earned and marketing you can buy. So if that seems a little bit cryptic, I can't pay the New York Times to review your book. It doesn't matter what I do. I can't throw any amount of money at them. It's not going to change the fact that they may or may not review your book. I don't have control over it in that way. But a really effective pitch, a really wonderfully written book can earn you a slot in the New York Times. So that's publicity in that sense. I can't pay, well, that's not entirely true. There are some independent bookstores that you can pay them a fee and they'll host an event for you. But in most circumstances, that's probably not the way you want to go. You want a bookstore to host an event because they feel like it really resonates with their readers and it's something with their customers, and it's something that is going to really contribute to their community and is useful for their store. So earning those things. And then marketing, you buy postcards, you buy ad space, you buy merchandising in bookstores and email placement at shelf awareness or whatever it is. So all of those things require a marketing budget to fuel, and that's, I think, the basic difference between publicity and marketing. Okay. Let's see, any more questions? How do you handle negative feedback on books that deal with diversity or sensitive subjects, especially for children? Oh boy, that's a really, really big question. I come from a press, my most recent place of business, where we were dealing with critical or negative feedback, what we called crisis communications issues, every single week. There was something every week. It's incredibly challenging. I think being very honest with the audience and the customer is really important. What your objectives and your mission were in trying to communicate this diverse issue or this question that you feel like was a challenging subject is important. If you made a misstep, if there really was something problematic with the book that you published, an apology is generally well received, even if it doesn't necessarily fix the problem entirely. So crisis communications around negative feedback and negative social media is a very, very challenging area. It's an area where I recommend that people get professional assistance because it can rapidly escalate into a real problem. So if you're concerned about publishing a book around a challenging or diverse topic, I think being preemptive is really important, and putting the discussion out there early before the book is published to get ahead of some of those issues is really important. And being able to be really upfront in interviews and discuss it from the get-go in order to stem those critical questions can be really helpful. Okay, any other questions? We have a little more time. Okay. I think that's the end of the questions. Nobody has anything else? Okay, I'm going to say thank you so much for joining us today. It was really nice to talk with all of you and talk about the thing I love most, publishing books. So if you want to contact me, my information is here. I hope you'll come back for another session or sign up for the newsletter, or come find me on social media, Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else, or shoot me an email. Thanks so much and have a great day.